So we're going to look at the estrous cycle today. We're first going to go through the 4 phases of the estrous cycle. Then we're going to look at a brief overview of the estrous cycle and then dive a little bit deeper into the details about the estrous cycle. So the 4 phases of the estrous cycle include met-estrous, di-estrous, pro-estrous, and estrous. So each of these phases have varying lengths and times that they occur at. So met-estrous occurs from day 0 to 5. Di-estrous occurs from day 5 to 17. Pro-estrous occurs from day 17 to 20. And then finally, estrous occurs from day 20 to 0. Okay, so now that we know those 4 phases and what days they span between, let's go down here and look at it in a sense of a graph. So again, we said that met-estrous is going to span from day 0 to 5. So we'll draw our block right here for met-estrous. Then we'll move into di-estrous from day 5 to 17. Then from pro-estrous, day 17 to 20. And then finally, we'll have estrous, this last little sliver of the graph, from day 20 to day 0. So again, we said this is met-estrous. Then we'll go into di-estrous. Then pro-estrous. And then we'll finally have estrous. So you've probably noticed by now that di-estrous is the longest phase of the estrous cycle. So the span of di-estrous is directly related to the CL, which we'll get down to that in a minute when we go through the details. Now let's look at the hormones and at what rate they're occurring throughout these 4 phases. So we're going to be dealing with estrogen and progesterone throughout all 4 of these phases. So during met-estrous, we're going to be on the descent of estrogen. So it's going to be decreasing in amount. Right here, we're going to go down in our estrogen. On the other hand, our progesterone will begin to peak during met-estrous. It's going to start climbing. As we go into di-estrous, our progesterone levels will peak and maintain. These levels of progesterone are maintained through the presence of the CL. And then our estrogen levels during di-estrous will stay at a low constant level. Now, as we move into pro-estrous, our levels of the 2 hormones are going to switch. Our progesterone is going to begin to decline during pro-estrous and also into estrous. And our estrogen is going to begin to rise and finally peak in estrous. Okay, so again, we said this is estrogen and this is our progesterone. So E2 is simply estrogen, P4 is progesterone. I'm going to highlight this so you can see it a little better. Purple is going to be for progesterone. So again, we said it increases during met-estrous. It's going to peak and maintain during di-estrous. Then we're going to have progesterone taper off in pro-estrous and continue to taper into estrous. Now our pink is going to be our estrogen. So we said our estrogen is going to descend during met-estrous. The level is going to maintain during diestrus at a low level. Then we're going to begin to see estrogen start peaking during proestrus and meet its peak in estrus. So let's go through and look at each of these phases in a little bit more detail. Again, we said during met-estrus, we're going to have a decrease in estrogen or E2 and an increase in progesterone or P4. At this point in time, we're also going to start preparing for our CL. So prep for CL. Okay, so in diestrus, we're going to have our CL formation, which, as I said earlier, is what's causing this peak in progesterone and maintenance of progesterone. And again, as I said earlier, the length of diestrus is going to be directly related to the lifespan of that CL. So moving into proestrus, we're going to have our CL regression, which is why we're seeing this decrease in progesterone. So as we said, we're going to have a increase in estrogen or E2 and a decrease in progesterone or P4. So on top of this, during proestrus, we're going to begin for ovulation, which is going to occur in estrus. So prep for ovulation. So some last details about estrus. As I said, we're going to have ovulation in estrus, which is going to occur at the end of estrus or roughly around day 0. So we're going to put ovulation. And as we said earlier, during estrus, we're going to have an increase in E2 or estrogen and a decrease in progesterone or P4. So those are the details that are happening or what's happening during each phase of estrus. So I want to show you a little visual to help you better understand what's going on in the ovary during these phases of estrus. So as we've seen in the past, this is our ovary. Here we have our egg nest. Then we're going to have our developing follicles. Then we're going to have our dominant follicle that's going to ovulate. Then we're going to have our formation of our CL. So if we put this into perspective of our phases, we will see what's going on, like I said, from a visual standpoint. So, as we are building our follicles, getting ready for a dominant follicle, we would be going through proestrus. So right here, as we're working towards our dominant follicle, we're going through proestrus. Now, as we said earlier, estrus is going to consist of ovulation. So over here we'll have estrus occurring, where we have our dominant follicle, and then finally where it ovulates. Now, after estrus, we're going to lead into met-estrus as we prepare for our CL. And then lastly, diestrus would be from the point where the CL forms to when it regresses. So right in here, we're going to have diestrus. So again, this just helps give you a visual of what's happening in the ovary. We said proestrus is going to be leading up to estrus. So when our follicles are sitting there developing, estrus is going to consist of ovulation in our dominant follicle. Then estrus will lead into met-estrus as we're getting ready for our CL. Diestrus is going to consist of our CL, and remember that the span of diestrus is directly related to the lifespan of the CL. So once the CL dies out, diestrus will end. And again, from diestrus, we'll go into proestrus. So let's review everything real quick. Again, we said the 4 phases of estrus are met-estrus, diestrus, proestrus, and estrus. So metestrus is going to span from day 0 to 5. We're going to have decreased levels of estrogen and increased levels of progesterone during this time. Diestrus is going to be the longest phase of the cycle, and it will span roughly from day 5 to 17. Again, characteristics are high levels of progesterone, low levels of estrogen. And as we said, the high levels of progesterone are related to the CL. Then we go into our proestrus. We'll have decreased levels of progesterone because of our CL regression, and we'll have increased levels of estrogen preparing for estrus, and finally ovulation. And lastly, we have our estrus phase where ovulation occurs. And we said during estrus, our progesterone levels are going to be low and our estrogen level is going to peak out. So it's as simple as that. That's all there is to know about the estrous cycle.